I don't know if it makes, hi, everybody. I don't know if
Ah,
it makes a difference,
hi,
but the time,
Joanna. Good to
uh,
see you.
hi, the time change, has made it so that over here, you're a little later in the day. So some people, it might have been different for their schedules
Well, we will change also on this Sunday. So
on Sunday.
by
Yeah.
next week, we'll be back to the normal.
Well, it definitely benefited me this morning because I was at a conference in Poland this morning. And, I was so grateful that it was not a 6-hour time difference because I only had to get up at 4.
Good to see you.
Yeah.
Hello, everyone. It's Nancy.
Hi,
Good to see everybody.
Hi, Nancy. Good to see you.
Thank you.
Καλησπέρα, Θανάση.
Καλησπέρα, κυρία Φιλανιώτου.
Κάτι έγινε και δεν άκουγα. Α, τώρα σας ακούω.
Όχι, ναι, είχα κλειστό το μικρόφωνο. Τι κάνετε?
Τι κάνεις?
Καλά λέμε, καλά. Δόξα τω Θεώ. Εσείς?
Ναι. Σήμερα μιλούσα για σένα με τον... Μάλλον χτες, πότε με πήρε τηλέφωνο? Ο Γαβαλάς. Μου λέει πότε θα το στείλεις εκείνο το κείμενο, αλλά θα στο στείλω. Άντε.
Είναι στα χέρια σας τώρα, ναι.
Έπαθα μια τεράστια ζημιά. Έσπασα το σκληρό μου δίσκο και έχασα τα πάντα που είχα μέσα. Δεν είχα backup.
Μάλιστα.
Και ψάχνω να μαζέψω πράγματα από εδώ και από εκεί και είμαι σε απελπισία.
Καταλαβαίνω. Αν χρειαστεί να στείλω ξανά αυτό το κείμενο.
Ναι, θα σου πω. Κοιτάζω να δω τώρα τα κομματάκια, τι έχω.
Ωραία, τέλεια.
Okay.
Χάρηκα που σας άκουσα.
Κι εγώ.
Στα μισή θα περιμένω ακόμα 2-3 λεπτά, Θανάση, νομίζω ότι μπαίνει ακόμα κόσμος.
Ναι.
We'll wait a few more minutes till everybody gets in, and then we'll start in a few moments. Yes, the lecture will be in English. Sorry, we've been chatting in Greek, but the lecture will be in English, and we'll switch to English soon. The introduction and the lecture will be in English. So sorry if we have made you worried. Once we start, I will ask you all to turn off your video cameras and your microphones so that the bandwidth is not stressed with too much. And also, I will I'll let you know that we are recording this and we're live streaming it on YouTube.
Γεια σου, Φρόσο. Γεια σας.
Γεια σου, Φρόσο μου, τι κάνεις?
Ωραία. Βλέπω κόσμο πολύ.
Πολύς κόσμος. Έχουμε μάθει τώρα να έχουμε μεγάλη παρέα στις διαλέξεις.
Βέβαια.
Αφού είπε η Φρόσο γεια, λέω και εγώ γεια.
Μπράβο, Δημήτρη μου.
Καλησπέρα, Δημήτρη.
Γεια.
Η Πάμελα, έχουμε πολλά παιδιά. Το βιογραφικό θα το πει μόνος το Θανάσης.
Όχι, έχω αναλάβει καθήκοντα, γι' αυτό είμαι το...
Είπα, μήπως μια που τα λέει όλα πήγε το δικό του.
Σήμερα θα αναλάβω εγώ τα καθήκοντα.
Ωραία, λαμπερά.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
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 Να αρχίσουμε, Θανάση, λες?
Ναι.
Ή να περιμένουμε μερικά λεπτά?
Ας αρχίσουμε, ναι.
Ωραία. So, good evening, everybody. Thank you all for being here. I will ask you now to turn off your microphones and your cameras. I'm Lina Kassianidou. I'm the former director of the unit and a colleague of Thanasis, and I have the honor of presenting him today. He usually has this role, but since he's the speaker, I will present him to you this evening. So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 7th Zoom lecture of the 55th public lecture series celebrating 30 years of research at the Archaeological Research Unit of the University of Cyprus. It is my great pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Athanasios Vionis, Associate Professor in Byzantine Archaeology and Art at the Department of History and Archaeology and Director of the Archaeological Research Unit of the University of Cyprus. Thanasis completed his undergraduate studies in ancient history and archaeology at the University of Durham in the UK in 1997 and continued with his doctoral research at the University of Leiden in the Netherlands, where he received his doctoral title in medieval and post-medieval archaeology in 2005. He also undertook postdoctoral research at the Catholic University of Leuven in Belgium, having won a postdoctoral fellowship for scientific research in international mobility before he moved to the University of Cyprus to take up his position as lecturer in 2009. His research focuses on landscape archaeology and archaeological survey, settled and sacred landscapes, GIS applications in archaeology and the use of space, pottery production, circulation and use, food preferences and everyday life in the Byzantine and post-Byzantine eras. He has published numerous papers in journals, edited volumes and conference proceedings on topics related to his research interests, a monograph on the medieval and post-medieval insular Aegean with Leiden University Press, and has co-edited 4 open access peer-reviewed volumes. He is a member of the editorial advisory board of the Journal of Greek Archaeology, while he has been acting as peer reviewer of several scientific journals and publishing houses. He has also been acting as remote reviewer for research grant proposals submitted for funding to the European Commission and to several national research foundations. In 2018, he was appointed head of the newly founded Commission for Byzantine Archaeology by the Bureau of the International Association of Byzantine Studies. In 2010, Athanasios established the Artifact and Landscape Studies Laboratory, functioning as an operating platform of the Archaeological Research Unit, which he has been coordinating since then. He has collaborated with the universities of Leiden, Leuven, Newcastle, and Edinburgh in the framework of archaeological projects in Greece and Turkey, and he's currently coordinating 4 research programs hosted at the ARU and funded by the Cyprus Research and Innovation Foundation and the University of Cyprus. His main archaeological field project, the Settled and Sacred Landscapes of Cyprus, is an ongoing intensive survey program in the Xeros River Valley in the Larnaca district, initiated in 2014 and coordinated in collaboration with Giorgos Papandoniou and Doria Nicolaou. His presentation today is entitled The Byzantine and Historical Archaeologies of Greece and Cyprus, Artifact and Landscape Studies. So, Athanasios, you have the floor if you'd like to share your screen.
Yes. Thank you very much, Lina. Καλησπέρα σε όλους και καλώς ορίσατε. Thank you all for attending and welcome to our tonight's lecture. First of all, I would like to thank Lina for her kind introduction and also for accepting to take up this role today because of this special event. As all of my colleagues have already noted in previous meetings, in previous lectures during the semester, I cannot omit in repeating how happy I am here and how thankful I am towards all my colleagues. Every single one of them I would like to thank for their continued support in terms of my research activities, but also on a personal level. As also my colleagues have noted before, the Archaeological Research Unit is like a family, and I really feel it has been a family to me since day one, since the day I arrived in Cyprus in 2009. Thank you. Let me first minimize this. Yes. Okay. It is accurate to acknowledge that systematic research into Byzantine and Ottoman landscapes, material culture, and life in Greece and Cyprus sprang out of historical archaeology, untangling their archaeological marginality only as late as the 1980s and 1990s, when archaeologists started to appreciate the rich textual and material legacy of those eras in the framework of regional survey projects. Crisis, abandonment, colonization, prosperity and relocation, as well as mentalities, anthropogenic forces, cultural values and memory were important factors that led to the crucial changes and transformations within the settlement system, but also of the material culture of later historical periods. These factors have not been always sufficiently understood by Byzantinists, medievalists, and historical archaeologists working in Greece and Cyprus. This presentation combines the results of the research activities of the Artifact and Landscape Studies Laboratory, or ArtLands Lab, of the Archaeological Research Unit, in the framework of 2 ongoing projects in Boeotia, central Greece, and in the Xeros Valley in Cyprus, in an attempt to discuss landscape transformations, social structure, methodological advances, and the future of the hybrid fields of Byzantine medieval and Ottoman historical archaeology. Byzantine and medieval archaeology are long-established terms in Western and non-Western literature, although it was only in 2018 that Byzantine archaeology was recognized by the International Association of Byzantine Studies as a discipline of its own, developed independently from the long-established history of Byzantine art, with the founding of the International Committee for Byzantine Archaeology. Yet historical archaeology as a term may cause confusion. Although this terminology is commonly employed by colleagues in Northwest Europe and North America to refer broadly to the period after 1500 AD, one may rightfully claim that classical or Roman archaeology, for example, are also historical archaeologies. However, being aware of how much of daily life in historical periods remains undocumented, the term is employed here to refer to the archaeology of the period of Ottoman domination in Greece and Cyprus, and the rise of this and raise this new field's potential location in interdisciplinary environments, so as to comply with past and recent advances of this flourishing and established discipline in other than the United States. Obviously, one cannot possibly fully cover all aspects of landscape and material cultural transformations across this long period between the 7th and 19th centuries in Greece and Cyprus in 50 minutes. Thus, I will limit myself to 2 transitional historical eras, that is, the Byzantine early Middle Ages in the 7th to 9th centuries, and the post-medieval or early Ottoman era in the 15th to 17th centuries, examining 3 major issues: the sharp transformations in settlement systems and demographic trends, the distinctive technology and consumption patterns, and the role of memory and the effects of abandonment of historic landscapes and monuments through heritage management and community archaeology. The aim is not to compare between these 2 regions, as they may not be comparable after all. Rather, by using the 2 case studies from Greece and Cyprus, not only do we showcase ArtLands Lab's contribution to understanding little-known periods and related archaeological and historical phenomena in the 2 countries, but we also contribute to identifying common patterns and contrasting conjectures during periods that regions left the boom and entered their bust cycles. The Artifact and Landscape Studies Laboratory was established in 2010 as an operating platform of the Archaeological Research Unit of the University of Cyprus. The aim of ArtLands Lab is firstly the documentation, processing and study of landscape archaeology in a number of field projects through a complete set of technical equipment, employing a range of informed methods and of intensive field survey, such as the systematic counting of pottery densities, aerial photography and remote sensing, microtopographical and geoarchaeological surveys, and the in situ digital recording of archaeological information and monuments. Secondly, a team of specialized postdoctoral researchers and doctoral candidates, coordinated by the speaker, is engaged in landscape studies and spatial analysis and the documentation, typological, and analytical study and publication of ceramic finds. The archaeological data and preliminary results on historic landscapes and ceramics discussed in the first case study from Greece derive from many seasons of archaeological fieldwork made possible through my collaboration with the intensive survey by the Durham-Cambridge Boeotia project and the Ancient Cities of Boeotia project at several ancient city sites and their territory in the province of Boeotia from the 1980s to 2010, under the direction of John Bentley from Durham University and later Leiden University, Anthony Snodgrass from the University of Cambridge, and Božidar Slapšak from the University of Ljubljana, with a speaker as assistant field director from 2000 onwards. And this is a map of the province of Boeotia with all city sites and their territories that have been explored through the 2 aforementioned projects, namely Ancient Thespiae and the Valley of the Muses, the ancient city of Aliertos, Koronia, Hyetos in the north, and Tanagra in the east. Primary archaeological data in the second case study from Cyprus derived from the settled and sacred landscapes of Cyprus Archaeological Project, or CESALAC, in the Xeros River Valley in the Larnaca district, co-directed by Giorgos Papandoniou from Trinity College Dublin, Doria Nicolaou, and myself since 2014. CESALAC aims to identify, map, and interpret traces of pre-modern human activity in the Xeros Valley in order to examine the interaction of secular and religious space with the natural environment and other forces. Turning to the Greek case study and the first transitional period now, I should note that the debate about the ruralization of late antique urban space during the Byzantine early Middle Ages in the late 7th and 8th centuries is ongoing and well known. However, with new archaeological discoveries and recent refinements to early medieval pottery chronology, a new picture of settlement, economy, and trade is emerging. Thus, I'm skeptical about the use of the term ruralization in its strict sense. Byzantinists seem to have consistently tended to compare Byzantine towns and their successors to their Roman predecessors. The volume of archaeological data has increased considerably over the past decade, but the evidence at first sight does not seem to support the argument that towns, despite their transformations and adaptations to new political, economic, and social conditions, really continued to play the same central role as in Greco-Roman and late antiquity. As illustrated in the case of Boeotia, urbanism in the Byzantine early Middle Ages did not collapse entirely, and the idea of the city or the role of the old local regional centers may have survived in an altered form after the conventional end of late antiquity in the 7th century. Although I recognize that major changes occurred during the period in question, I prefer to detach my approach to the issue of continuity or discontinuity of civitates and urban life in the Byzantine early Middle Ages from the established theories in current scholarship. Thus, in the case of Boeotia, I have mapped, as you see, bishoprics listed by the written sources in an attempt to combine and compare this information with the archaeological record, which is itself reevaluated in the light of our current knowledge of previously unrecognized pottery types and numismatic finds. It should also be emphasized that the references in the sources to bishoprics at several locations and previous civitates throughout the empire do not necessarily imply the survival and presence of a city or the urban character of a site during the Byzantine early Middle Ages and later. On the basis of his previous work at the ancient city sites of Hyetos and Thespiae in Boeotia, John Bintliff argued that the lack of evidence for re-walling at Hyetos in late antiquity suggests a process of ruralization, with the village community dispersing to a cluster of small sites in the open country close to the ancient town during the Byzantine early Middle Ages, while limited archaeological evidence for activity suggests a reduction in the extent of Thespiae. A restudy of the surface ceramic material from the two sites, the distribution of which you see on those two maps, however, has revealed dispersed settlement activity within the former town areas throughout the 7th, 8th, and 9th centuries. Not only did settlement continue, but transport amphorae of known types, such as early Byzantine globular amphorae found in Constantinople and Aegean regions that remained under Byzantine control during this period, indicate continuity in production and trade. This suggests that we should question the degree of ruralization assumed to have taken place in towns after the 7th century in different parts of the empire. In the region of Tanagra in eastern Boeotia, new discoveries throw light on early medieval settlement hierarchy and continuity in this region. Although originally thought to have replaced the shrunken walled town of Tanagra in the early Middle Ages, a walled refuge site 2 kilometers away on the hill of Kastri suggests a different situation based on careful examination of the built structures and the ceramic evidence. The hill, now occupied by a nunnery, is surrounded by a defensive wall running along the contours, encircling an upper and a lower terrace. Survey and rescue excavation have revealed the densely occupied area, with the ceramic evidence suggesting continuity from the 5th to the 12th century and the 5th or 6th century date for the construction of the fortification. This means that the site, smaller than the walled area of late antique Tanagra and Tanagra itself, coexisted for nearly 2.5 centuries. The evidence from Tanagra and Castries seems to indicate that the first signs of change in urban space in the 6th and 7th centuries did not involve the aesthetic decline of cities. As well as investing in the size and appearance of basilica churches, the second most important element of late antique societies was investment in land and other means of production. Archaeological evidence suggests that habitation continued within the walled site of Castries in the 8th and 9th centuries, but in a rather more dispersed pattern, while its late antique walls must have been kept in good condition by its inhabitants. Although it would be simplistic to argue that the walled site of Castries succeeded Tanagra in the Byzantine early Middle Ages, the archaeological data confirms some kind of link between the former and the latter in terms of settlement and site status in the region. The existence of walled site in the Byzantine early Middle Ages on the Greek mainland, Asia Minor, and the Aegean Islands, either in the form of shrunken late antique town sites or a new type of defended settlement in their immediate vicinity, is gradually becoming known to Byzantinists. Instead of a terminology that incorporates notions of decline and ruralization, such as walled village, refuge site, and castro, I propose the terms microtown or pier village for the new form of habitation appearing in the late 7th century. Taking the early medieval landscape of Tanagra as an example, with Tanagra and Castries located only a couple of kilometers apart and within the same community area, we might wonder what role memory played among the inhabitants of Castries and how they perceived the space inhabited, urban or rural, central or peripheral, primary or secondary. Fortification walls and walled spaces should be viewed as another characteristic landmark of the period, possibly signifying a sense of connectivity between late antiquity and the early Middle Ages. The functionality of fortification walls during this period may be viewed as primarily political, at least on a local or regional scale. Considering that such constructions were designed to create a visible separation between the peaceful community inside and the unstable world outside, their height and overall appearance must have inspired a sense of monumentality and authority in an otherwise fragmented peripheral region of the Byzantine world. An interesting comparison can be made between the fortified settlements of Boeotia in the early Middle Ages, such as Castries and Lombard Italy, where the relationship between city walls and urban status has been questioned on the basis of Paul the Deacon's Historia Langobardorum. Paul makes careful use of the word city for civitas and fortress for castrum, in that he employs the term castrum for the site of Forum Julii, a fortified settlement, before its elevation to the role of capital of the region by King Alboin, after which he shows no further hesitation in applying the term civitas to the king's preferred settlement. If a political decision can change the status of a settlement so dramatically from one day to another, irrespective of its location, public amenities, and history, one wonders whether the growth and decline in the number of bishoprics mentioned in the sources and mapped in the case of Boeotia earlier may reflect the growing or declining importance of local or regional settlements on the basis of the Church's political decisions. Turning to the Cypriot case study now, it is important to note that after the Church of Cyprus gained its autocephaly at the Council of Ephesus in 431, the role of the bishops and the clergy in church investment, community leadership began to take off. By the early 5th century, a dense network of 15 bishoprics was established on the island in a territory of 9,250 square kilometers. Meanwhile, the dense network of new basilicas in the Cypriot countryside by the middle 6th century testifies to the agricultural and population explosion in rural areas and reveals the spread of Christianity into the countryside, redefining the island's religious and economic landscapes. As we have already published in different media in the case of the Xeros River Valley in Cyprus, the ceramic evidence, the presence of monuments of Christian worship, topographical parameters, and extensive surrounding agricultural territory, and comparative evidence from other excavated and surveyed sites suggest that in late antiquity, the site of Kofinu, which you see here at the center of the survey area in the Xeros, played a central role within its settlement chamber, coincidentally overlapping with our survey area. The extent of the site, which I would call an agro-town, suggests the existence of a population of about 1,000 inhabitants during its maximum size in the 6th and 7th centuries in an area of 13 hectares, as recently confirmed by geophysical prospection by our colleague Apostolos Aris. A basilica excavated at the center of the site, just down here, functioned as the focal point of the settlement, standing at its approximate center and dominating its immediate environs, while a potentially second church stood at its northwest corner on a hill. And I'm glad to say that the geophysical prospection by Apostolos Aris was highly successful. Here you see an image, a screening of the geophysical prospection with not just the few structures that Apostolos has noted on the previous map, but also several others. And this is fascinating considering the flimsy constructions of flimsy domestic structures of the period in the lowlands, Cyprus included. As already noted in the case of Boeotia, archaeological surveys have concluded that after the traditional collapse of complex urban life from the late 6th century onwards, the countryside went back to being a landscape organized around pier or proto-villages. By that time, rural communities had established ways of becoming self-sufficient. In the 7th to 9th centuries, villages may have remained in use, but rural communities were rather smaller. Unfortunately, the nature of this use was such that it left less visible archaeological traces. Our field survey in the Xeros reveals a similar picture, where a booming latent countryside of farms and agro-towns transformed into a village community dispersed and scattered into a cluster of tiny sites in the open country during the Byzantine early Middle Ages. The analysis and interpretation of high-resolution scientific proxy data recently seem to explain the contrasting fates of the two halves of the empire in the 5th to 6th centuries and the deep transformations of the 7th and 8th. Both proxy data and the Byzantine documentary sources agree that in the period known as the Dark Ages Cold period, between 730 and 900 AD, droughts and famines became more frequent and were accompanied by severe winters with frosts and snow. Pandelitsa Milona is currently examining related issues in the framework of her Athanasios postdoctoral geoarchaeological project with charcoal and soil samples from the Xeros River Valley. These climatic fluctuations, combined with a possible gradual straining of natural resources, may partly explain downward demographic trends and may have affected agricultural patterns from the cultivation of vines and olives to less risky investments such as cereal production and livestock raising. Excavated evidence at the former Basilica of Panagia in Kofeinou indicates continuous use and perhaps restructuring of the monument into the 8th and 9th centuries. Two more churches of the same period are located in the vicinity. The first, dedicated to Saints Athanasios and Cyril in neighboring Menoia, was built in the late 7th or 8th century, while the second, dedicated to Saint Athanasios Pendaschinitis in nearby Pendaskinos, was built in the 8th or 9th century. Their establishment during this period of transformations testified to the continuous presence of the church and the possible role in settlement formation and land supervision after the shrinkage of the late antique agro-town of Kofeinou. Could it be that previous local central places were replaced by or broken up into a number of tiny sites dispersed in the countryside and focused within the territories of new or transformed churches and pilgrimage sites? This phenomenon is again not unknown in Mediterranean archaeology. As we shall see later, in 17th century central Greece, following an astonishing era of population growth and land exhaustion of microenvironments during the early Ottoman period, villages were broken up into a number of small surface states and the rise of tax farming, when the Ottoman state leased out abandoned plots to individual holders. In 8th century Cyprus, the church may have played the role of the 17th century Ottoman state, possibly explaining dispersed human activity in rural landscapes previously occupied by concentrated settlements, with arable land restricted along river valleys and alluvial coastal plains so characteristic of Cyprus, such as the one in the Xeros. On the other hand, and as Richard Hodges has previously argued in the case of Northwest Europe, The sacred relics of a saint were amongst the most precious possessions and an important agent for the formation of central places in the early Middle Ages. The aforementioned church of Saint Athanasios of Pendaskinon housed, according to the excavator Yorgos Philotheou, the original tomb of the 7th century saint, whose cult survived down to the 15th century. The survival of Athanasius' cult beyond late antiquity must be related to the development of settlements that house rural shrines. This pilgrimage church, built only 1,500 meters from the coast during an otherwise troubled period of Arab raids, must have sustained the territory's dispersed communities through the visits of overseas pilgrims and its function as a locus for donation and exchange in the Byzantine early Middle Ages. Turning to the material culture of the period, specifically ceramics, the commonest of archaeological finds, a fascinating picture has recently emerged through excavations and archaeological surveys at various parts of the Aegean and the Eastern Mediterranean. The early medieval ceramic assemblage from Constantinople, the Aegean Islands, the coasts of mainland Greece and Asia Minor, Crete and Cyprus, includes 6 categories of pottery vessels, namely globular amphorae, wheel-made cooking pots, handmade vessels, stick burnished wares, painted jugs, and Constantinopolitan monochrome glazed wares, serving basic daily needs and revealing 2 parallel extremes: an increased regionalism in ceramic production on the one hand, and a repeated pattern of similar ceramic types and composition, that is, a ceramic koiné, on the other. Apart from evidence supporting exchange activity between Constantinople, regions on either side of the Aegean, southern Italy, Crete and Cyprus, this ceramic koiné, a common language of forms and functions, points to unification rather than fragmentation of the provinces throughout the early Middle Ages, the identification of an early medieval attitude, and local responses to global phenomena. The Byzantine early medieval ceramic koiné examined here falls within the category of the cultural koiné. The use of the term koiné in this context is purely conventional, referring to a shared vocabulary of ceramic assemblages identified in parts of the Aegean, Anatolian, Cyprus. The intention is to stress the insignificance of these similar forms and styles within early medieval ceramic assemblages shared by common people and used by the average household throughout the period in question. The intention is not to iron out local ceramic particularities, but to read those as distinct from each other related dialects, reflecting diversity as well as a relative material homogeneity in terms of the technology of ceramic forms and of the concept of certain pottery styles, accomplished through resistance, accommodation, transformation, resilience, connectedness, and adaptive cycles. The 6 categories of commonwares and table vessels mentioned above belong to 3 out of the 4 main functional groups: long and short distance transport, food processing, and serving, satisfying all basic domestic requirements. Thus, the period ceramic gap has now been bridged. The distinct chemical identity of 20 samples of early medieval pottery from the Xeros illustrates the abandonment of the latent decentralized production and the region-specific clay sources, and the replacement by a different source and/or production center in the wider territory. Principal component analysis by Andreas Haralambous confirms our dating of the pottery assigned to this archaeologically little-known era in Cypriot archaeology. Combined with a macroscopic examination of contemporary samples from different sites on the island by the speaker, principal component analysis suggests that next to the manufacture of homemade cookwares at household level during the transitional early Middle Ages, there existed a single production center or specific clay source, possibly located in the immediate territory of the neighboring village of Kornos, one of the major production centers of commonwares to the recent past. This transformation of the ceramic chaîne opératoire is an exceptional phenomenon that agrees with parallel changes noted in settlement systems, and as exemplified above. The distribution map of all 6 aforementioned categories of wares provides a visual example of a complete assemblage present at a number of sites in different parts of the Aegean and the Eastern Mediterranean. Recent archaeological evidence suggests that humble commonwares constitute the bulk of domestic pottery in use during this period. Smadar Gabrieli's research on the handmade wares of Cyprus is of special importance in this context. Moreover, it is striking that although we're dealing mostly with pottery of a coarse nature here, one sees a common pattern of similar technologies and ceramic forms in those lands that remained under Byzantine control during the 8th century. An assessment of 8th century coin finds forms an excellent parallel to the distribution of 8th century amphorae, cookware, and table vessels, and further testifies to life and trade continuity throughout this period. Although it may be pure coincidence that most of the sites with 8th century coin and ceramic evidence are located at regions that are well known for past and ongoing systematic archaeological research, the fact that those sites are located on long-established trade routes to east and west should not be underestimated. The distribution of the aforementioned ceramic coinae reveals a pattern of connectivity between certain regions of the empire, while local variations within the existing coinae point to a number of minor ceramic coinae at different geographical regions, where local particularities seem to have played their role. Does this distribution and/or identification of similar wares comprise evidence for trade connections and movement of goods? As John Haldon notes, trade continued at a reduced scale after the 7th century, while immigrant or moving populations, such as single merchants and traders or military contingents, brought with them both techniques and habits of consumption. Moving back to the Greek case study, the next period of transformations during the early Ottoman era in the 15th to 17th centuries, I should note that the negative perception and unpopular legacy of the Muslim Ottoman Empire, the creation of national identities in the 19th and early 20th centuries, and the focus on antiquity in present-day nation-states of the Eastern Mediterranean did not encourage the growth and potential of Ottoman or historical archaeology as a discipline. What about the archaeology of the peasantry in Ottoman provinces? How diagnostic is the material life of the Ottoman-era living in marginal regions of the empire beyond Istanbul's renowned mosques, baths, and palaces? The second half of this presentation employs insights and methods from the field of landscape archaeology and material culture studies to examine population trends, economic patterns, and daily life in Ottoman Greece and Venetian and Ottoman Cyprus. The distinct history of Central Greece in the post-medieval period began to emerge in the middle of the 14th century, when most of the Boeotian countryside became depopulated and deserted. The devastating effects of the Black Death, continuous warfare between Byzantines, Franks, and Ottomans, and successive raids by pirates in coastal Boeotia during the second half of the 14th century were particularly felt by the Frankish dukes of Thebes and Athens, who invited Albanian semi-nomadic clans to resettle deserted lands. The Albanian colonization of much of central and southern Greece was a practice repeated by the Ottomans after their conquest of Boeotia in 1460. The subsequent period of Pax Ottomanica during the second half of the 15th and most of the 16th centuries saw a tremendous demographic recovery and significant economic growth. This is well attested from the first surviving Ottoman register or Tahrir Defter of 1466 for Boeotia, with settlement mushrooming in the countryside and the rapid development of urban centers such as Thebes and Livadia. And here you see a nice map with the distribution of villages with inhabitants of Greek or Albanian origin noted as black circles and transparent rectangles respectively, which shows the separation of the inhabited space between the western part and the eastern part of Boeotia, with most of the abandoned lands, the fertile plains of eastern Boeotia, occupied by small villages, Albanian urbanitic villages. This development and recovery at all levels seems to have lasted until the 1580s, when the Golden Age reached its end and the Ottoman Empire entered a period of political, military, and social crisis, leading to inflation and financial exploitation of the peasantry, which was gradually weakened. As a result, many of the large prospering villages originating in the 15th and 16th centuries were either abandoned or contracted in size, while most of the surviving ones were broken up into a number of small chiftliks or self-estates with the rise of tax farming during the 17th century. The images show one of these chiftliks, the archaeological remains of one of these chiftliks of the 16th, 17th centuries, Ginosati here, and its material remains. The case study examined in this context, Panagia, occupies the south side of a rocky hill in the valley of the Muses, with the ruins of an orthogonal tower of the Frankish period on a high crag above it. The site is defined by the dense concentration of surface pottery within an area of approximately 11 hectares. Although very little remains at Panagia nowadays, architecturally, the microtopographic recording of the site in 1996 allowed the identification of a relatively large church with an apse here, and with a few surviving examples of longhouses in the area between the Frankish tower and the church. The ceramic assemblage from Panagia dates to the Frankish period between the 13th and 14th centuries, while the most prominent occupation phase of the site in the 15th and middle 16th centuries is represented by more than 50% of the assemblage. Occupation at Panagia continues on a reduced scale into the main Ottoman period between the late 16th and 17th centuries. This is a remarkable village assemblage in terms of the number, quality, and provenance of ceramic vessels present at the site. The pottery manifests a flourishing period of this sizable community of well-to-do Greek peasants in the 15th and 16th centuries, with imports from northern Italy and Anatolia, as well as regional imitations of imported wares. As mentioned above, the Frankish dukes of Athens and Thebes invited populations of semi-nomadic Albanian clans in order to resettle and recultivate a totally deserted and devastated land, a policy that the Ottomans also put in force during the second half of the 15th century. The surviving Greek-speaking communities became confined to western Boeotia and were clustered around Mount Helicon, places that generally had thin and unfertile soils. Albanians mainly settled on the fertile plains and rolling valleys, upland valleys of eastern and central South Boeotia. As is evidenced in the Tahrir Defterleri, Greek villages were mainly engaged in olive oil, wine, textile, and honey production, while the Albanians initially had a strong pastoralist base supplemented by cereal cultivation. According to the 1570 Tahrir Defter, Panagia is recorded to have taken a huge economic jump, with a remarkable increase in stock breeding and honey production, alongside a sharp reduction in viticulture and to some extent cotton and grain production. It is during the first 3 quarters of the 16th century that the inhabitants of Panagia reached their highest level of prosperity. Not only did they invest their wealth from viticulture and textiles in stock breeding, but also on the construction of 2 monasteries by 1570 and the purchasing of luxurious exotica, such as glazed tableware from northern Italy, as confirmed by the boom noted in the ceramic and population records. The ceramic population and economic figures, however, could also provide an explanation for the bust that followed a little later. Several ideas have been put forward to explain the phenomenon of the general decline in the final decades of the 16th and throughout the 17th century, attested not only at Panagia, but also at other wealthy villages in Boeotia and elsewhere in the Ottoman Empire. Epidemics, local conflicts and wars, overexploitation of the peasantry, migration, climatic change, such as the Little Ice Age, and exhaustion of the soul are some of them, a case similar to the Byzantine early Middle Ages that we saw earlier. The result was that villages were broken up into a number of small chieflik estates with the rise of tax farming during the 17th century. With the so-called chieflik system, the Ottoman state leased out abandoned plots of land to individual landholders or tax farmers controlling collections of small farms or chieflik estates, initially very small in size. This pattern fits perfectly well with Panagia. According to the 17th century Tahrir Defter, Panagia loses 2/3 of its population and is fragmented into 2 chiefliks. The pure aim of these farming estates was commercial agricultural produce, mainly of cash crops, intended to feed the growing demand for raw materials by rising industrial and capital estates in Western Europe. And this is an example, one of these chieflights, actually one of the chieflights recorded in the vicinity of Panagia, the site of Harmena. In the rural countryside of Cyprus, concentrated settlements started becoming archaeologically visible again in the 13th to 14th centuries. In the Xeros Valley, a large late medieval hamlet is attested around the 11th church of Panagia in Kofinu, where, according to a study by Urania Perdiki, two successive layers of fresco decoration of the 14th and 16th centuries, along with a number of late medieval burials around the monument, testify to the church's continued use. This large settlement that survived until the 16th century gradually moved to the location of the deserted Turkish Cypriot quarter of Kofinu, 700 meters to the east, around the standing 20th century mosque. A second, more substantial settlement, most possibly the main village of the region, of the period now region, is located 3.5 kilometers southeast of Kofinu. However, this site can be identified only through the distribution of off-site surface pottery around the present-day village of Alaminos, where the 15th century church of St. Mamas and a freestanding tower house of the middle 15th century define its focus. A number of dispersed small farms in the wider territory of the Xeros complete the picture of human recolonization across the rural landscape during this period. What were the factors that led to the dynamic formation of concentrated settlements in the Venetian and early Ottoman Cyprus, though? The new sociopolitical reality on the island naturally points to the elite members of the society and the feudal economic system. This is a commonly attested case in medieval Italy, Western Europe, and the Crusader Levant between the 10th and 12th centuries, when seigneurial lords forced communities into concentrated settlements, often around physical or conceptual nuclei. It seems that the late antique large rural settlements or local central places like Kofinu were replaced by new concentrated settlements developed around freestanding towers of the Venetian eras within microregions along river valleys such as the Xeros. The nobility no doubt contributed to this reorganization of settlement in the countryside in order to develop their own fiefs, centering their estates in 2- or 3-story tower houses run by minor lords or supervisors. Thus, towers in the rural countryside were designated to generate the revenue required by the Latin aristocracy to support its elevated lifestyle. The rectangular 3-story freestanding tower in the new central place of Alaminos in the Xeros settlement chamber must have been built in the 1460s, when, according to Florio Bustron, the village and its agricultural territory were granted to Giovanni Loredan. The functional analysis of the surface assemblage from the Xeros illustrates the balanced proportion between different classes of domestic ceramic wares and suggests permanent habitation at major and minor rural settlements. It is noteworthy that the majority consists of common wares rather than table vessels, as it is expected in rural assemblages. Principal component analysis confirms the long survival of a single production center of unglazed common wares or clay sources into the Venetian and early Ottoman eras. The continuous existence of one or a series of production sites using the same clay sources for the manufacturing of heavy utility ceramic wares is of particular significance, considering that traditionally this has been located in the territory of Kornos in the Larnaca district. Thus, a single or a series of workshops producing a collection of specific functional classes were in high demand and circulated throughout the island. This phenomenon comes in contrast with the collection of glazewares found in the Xeros, which bear a different chemical signature. Apart from the obvious observation that glazed wares in our assemblage come from a different production site, such as Lapithos on the north coast, using different clay sources, it is highly fascinating that the 15th to 17th centuries are characterized by different specialization between production sites. It is also worth noting that despite Latin and Ottoman presence and influence in Cyprus, our rural assemblage contains no imported ceramics from Italy or Anatolia. Italian and Anatolian imports seem to be confined to urban assemblages, whereas rural collections, such as the one from the Xeros, are dominated by regional commonwares and almost exclusively glazed products from Lapithos in Cyprus. Interestingly, the petrographic analysis of cooking pot fragments of the 13th to 16th centuries in the framework of the Stirring Pots on Fire project, funded by the Leventis Foundation and coordinated by the speaker, suggests, according to our former postdoctoral researcher Maria Dikomitou Iliadou, that together with changes in cooking pot shapes, a technological break and change in ceramic fabrics is noted in the 15th century. These changes are related to different and interlinked factors, including changes in dietary habits that had an impact on pottery production, technological changes in established cooking pot traditions, changes in the organization of production and distribution, and a search for different raw material resources. Moreover, chemical analysis of food residues in our samples indicate that dishes of mixed ingredients with a predominance of meat, mainly pork, were prepared in cookware of varied shapes, the technological evolution of which should be related to the reorganization of cookware production and distribution after the bubonic plague in the middle 14th century came to an end. Population decline in Cyprus may have subsequently led to a partial abandonment of agriculture and to an increased reliance on pig breeding, as well as sheep and goat herding. The effects of the plague, such as the freeing up of more pasture land, wider availability of animals, and fewer people across Europe, resulted in a major growth in meat consumption, with carnivorous Europe becoming a reality. Population decline and grain production restricted to the lowlands would have changed vegetation patterns in the Troodos and would include forested sections and an increased population of game. Thus, different types of meat became available for different groups of the island society. The intensification of settlement concentration on the Troodos from the late 15th and 16th centuries onwards explains in part an increased demand for mountain produce, such as meat, wool, and wood. Coming to the third and final part of this presentation, our Cypriot case study provides a paradigmatic and fascinating case in terms of heritage management and community archaeology. The Xeros Valley is located today at a major junction of the island's motorway, linking the capital Nicosia with the towns of Larnaca, Limassol, and Paphos. Although the Xeros Valley never attracted the interest of Cypriots driving on the busy motorway, its location on the edge of different Iron Age City Kingdom territories, its immediate proximity to the major infrastructure of the Roman road network, its choice as one of the most strategic localities of the Turkish Cypriots on the bloody bicommunal conflicts in the area in the 1960s, its habitation by Greek Cypriot refugees after 1974, and the establishment of the only governmental reception center for asylum seekers in Cyprus at Kofinu, hosting refugees from Syria, confirmed the centrality of this uncentral rural landscape today. Competition, conflict, and violence were at work in our research area, especially during Cyprus's recent past, having affected local communities living in the region nowadays by creating negative memories. In our attempt to answer the basic question of who owns the past, we proceeded with engaging with the local communities by bringing the results of our field project and the region's natural and cultural landscapes closer to the present-day inhabitants through public talks and guided tours, in combination with the development of a mobile application providing an on-site tour to landscapes and monuments in the Xeros Valley. The enterprise has been undertaken in the framework of the Unlocking the Sacred Landscapes of Cyprus project, coordinated by Yorgos Papandoniou and myself, in collaboration with the Department of Antiquities and funded by the European Regional Development Fund and the Republic of Cyprus through the Research and Innovation Foundation. The ultimate aim has been to examine how residents and visitors in the Xeros Valley make claims to remember and experience religious and secular monuments and their surrounding landscapes, while also investigating how claims are managed, negotiated, and contested by local communities and the state. While new technologies for capturing the dynamics of cultural landscapes are constantly emerging and developing in the study of Mediterranean landscapes and spaces, the employment of experiential approaches when it comes to religious landscapes and space remain relatively underdeveloped. In order to remedy this, an augmented reality mobile application was developed to support the exploration of monuments and archaeological sites in the Xeros Valley, serving as an on-site guided tour for visitors in the area. By employing image recognition and utilizing a location-based practice, the application provides the users with an immersive and educational experience. The different monuments in the area, Orthodox and Muslim, Byzantine and Ottoman, Greek Cypriot and Turkish Cypriot, comprise landmarks of a collective memory in the landscapes of the valley today. At the same time, the presence and coexistence of these monuments in the area in the 21st century reflect timeless and current phenomena: prosperity and symbiosis, displacement, immigration and human suffering, creation of national and religious identities, destruction of sacred sites, and abandonment. 10 such landmarks are included in the application, with accompanying texts in Greek, English, and Turkish, images, 360 viewers, and 3D virtual models and reconstructions, providing an immersive and educational experience. Our own experience with such application, employed for the first time on site in the cultural landscapes of Cyprus, and the reaction of the locals and other participants in the field, highlight its potential in enabling the narration and visualization of the historicity of the landscape and the fate of religious and other monuments of the past 1500 years. The feedback from the anonymous questionnaire filled in after our community archaeology weekend on October 31st and November 1st of 2020 by the local communities, archaeology students, professional guides, and other interested parties has been overwhelming. The aim was accomplished. The Cypriot public, both children and adults, participated in large numbers in this action. They learned about a region of negative memory. They observed through a different angle those humble monuments and landscapes they knew nothing about, while most importantly, the local inhabitants, most of them Greek Cypriot refugees since 1974, felt they came closer to their new home and appreciated its similarities and differences with their villages of origin. I hope I have managed to showcase that specific processes need to be inserted not only within their local socio-historical context, but also within broader geographical regions, since contemporary transformations and evolutions prove to be taking place globally. It is only then that phenomena can be better understood, as local histories usually reflect general trends because of specific power relations, environmental changes, and most importantly, changing mentalities. However, instead of summing up all the different phenomena observed through the examination of settlement and material cultural transformations in Greece and Cyprus in transitional phases of the post-antique era, I would like to close this public lecture with an intriguing element of our research in progress in collaboration with Silver Sky 3D, RISE, and the Department of Psychology at the University of Cyprus, bringing in a challenging and unconventional dimension to historical archaeology and to the experiencing of cultural heritage by Cypriot people. Having employed digital and theoretical approaches to spatial analysis of ritual and cult through the organization of 2 conferences by our Unlocking Sacred Landscapes Research Network in 2015 and 2018, both of which appeared as edited volumes in 2019, we proceeded with the employment of cognitive psychology in the study of sacred monuments. To address the final paragraph of my talk, here follows a sample video with no sound by Tetraktis Films, still in progress. The final product, an archaeological documentary on landscape archaeology, abandonment, memory, and community archaeology, will be presented at the annual Archaeological, Ethnographic and Historical Film Festival in Nicosia this summer. We thank Stavros Papageorgiou for his input and collaboration and for allowing me to show a sample of the documentary still in process. On the outskirts of our survey area in the Xeros Valley lies a 14th century church dedicated to Panagia Stathiotissa. This is the church. During the bicommunal conflicts in the 1960s, Turkish Cypriot villagers originally from the area or displaced there, most possibly shepherds, were in the habit of visiting this medieval church, abandoned and inaccessible to Greek Cypriots at that time. We have evidence of specific Turkish names and dates inscribed on the walls, next to the removed faces of some of the saintly figures. Through anthropological, ethnographic, and cultural heritage research, we aim to bring this sacred space into conversation with religious competition, conflict, and violence in the contemporary world. At the same time, with the support of computational applications, such as virtual reality technologies and the development of a number of cutting-edge methods in cognitive psychology, memory, and spatial cognition by our collaborator Marios Avramidis, we aim to combine current trends and approaches in archaeology and psychology to open up new horizons and opportunities for the exploration of memory, experience, and perception of this religious space and its historical fates. In the end, this particular monument and others in Cyprus give rise to new forms of negotiations, strengthening the development of social resilience and contributing to resilient societies. And this was the end. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Athanasi, for this wonderful lecture, bridging the Aegean and Cyprus, material culture, landscape, taking it all the way to public archaeology and everything. I don't think anybody could do it as well as you did. Thank you. Those of you who would like to ask a question, you can either write your question on the chat or you can unmute yourself and ask the question. I think they have the opportunity now. They can do it now technically. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So now you can unmute if you would like to ask a question. Let me check the chat. A lot of congratulations. Okay. We have a question from Nasia Makaruna. Thank you for a very interesting lecture. Apologies if it was mentioned and I missed it as I have connection problems. Are the findings concerning the Cypriot medieval economy, e.g. the reliance on pork supported by zooarchaeological or archaeobotanical findings?
Yes, thank you for the question. At the moment, the paper we published, which you saw on the slide, relies on the typochronology of cooking pots and the chemical analysis of residues, of organic residues within the cooking pots. Unfortunately, we have not undertaken archaeological research or any kind of related research. We have not started an excavation yet, but I am sure that colleagues in other institutions, such as the Cyprus Institute in Cyprus, is beginning to investigate these issues on the basis of zooarchaeological studies.
Thank you very much. Pamela Gaber asks, I'm curious about the differences in what you see in the Byzantine culture of the Xeros Valley and the inland regions at the time.
Yes, in the early Middle Ages. Well, the only an excellent survey project was conducted before ours on the northern foothills of the Troodos by Michael Gibbon, Bernard Knapp, and Vasiliki Kassianidou in the past, and this has been published. So far we have not much evidence about what happens in rural Cyprus during this difficult period, difficult archaeologically. this is due to the fact that we have not been able, archaeologists have not been able to identify the material culture of the late 7th, 8th, and early 9th centuries in Cyprus down to the 10th century. And this results in, in distribution maps with almost no evidence of occupation during this transitional period. Bringing in my expertise from pottery studies and through the very careful work conducted by our students taking part in our survey project, who had the chance to get trained in recognizing pottery forms, they were very careful, and we have a small assemblage of data to this period between the late 7th and late 9th centuries from the countryside of the Xeros River Valley. So at the moment, we cannot really compare archaeologically our region in the southern lowlands of Cyprus with other regions in Cyprus. We hope and we do expect that this will change in the years to come. I have personally, with some of our students in the group, visited sites that have been recognized or we know about through previous work in further up in the Troodos, and I'm happy to say that we do have evidence of this sort. Actually, a very nice piece of white monochrome glazeware from Constantinople comes from these sites, and it's further north from Kalavassos Skopetra. So there seems to be a pattern of an internal colonization taking place already in the 6th century in Cyprus, filling in niches of agricultural land and being closer to other resources such as copper already in the 6th century. And we know this also through Vasiliki Kassianidou's work, who has done research on the slag heaps of that period. Communities seem to be filling the landscape of Cyprus already during late antiquity. Something goes wrong, obviously the economic crisis and other effects such as climate and the climatic effects have a negative effect on both economy and population, and we start seeing these lowlands such as the Xeros being abandoned or more sparsely inhabited during this period. I believe that the answer to where the people went during this period, we will find possibly further up in the Troodos, on the foothills and further up. And as I said, from personal observation, I have seen that there is such evidence, although we're not investigating systematically this part of Cyprus, but hopefully another project may be able to do that.
Part of the reason I raised the question is the 5 much vaunted 8th century churches around the Dali area, and the fact that we have 7th century glazed pottery at Idalion that's waiting in the 2016 RDAC when we'll see that. But when I get to Cyprus, I'm happy to share with you. Also, it's notable that Steger and Walker excavated a Byzantine house, which is about 2 fields behind the Idalion Museum. So I think probably in the, I hope not too distant future, we have a lot to talk about.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for this information, Pamela, especially on the pottery. As I said, colleagues working in Cyprus, especially in excavations, are usually show me what they have found, and it's always a surprise because this kind of imported glazed vessels of the 8th and 9th centuries, as well as imported amphorae, possibly from the Aegean, as far as I can tell, if you look at them macroscopically, also of the 8th and 9th centuries, are slowly appearing, also as far inland as Nicosia, as my personal communication with Smadar Gabrieli, who showed me such material from Nicosia, illustrates. Thank you.
Thank you. There is there's a lot of comments. You will read them later, all the congratulations. But there is a question by Thomas Galland. There were no mentions of Ottoman period cemeteries or burials in your excellent lecture. Do they figure in any of your projects? Have
Yes,
other
yes.
Ottoman cemeteries been excavated besides Corinth?
Yes, thank you, Thomas. Actually, none of the projects I'm involved with has carried out an excavation at an Ottoman period cemetery. Yes, the one in Corinth is probably an exception and a good one, and a special one. I have to say that in our exploration in the later years of the Boeotia project in the late 1990s, when I was still a doctoral candidate at Durham and then Leiden,
Θανάση, σε χάσαμε.
Do you hear me now?
I don't know if it's my Wi-Fi or if it's if it's your Wi-Fi. There seems to you're breaking up.
Okay, it may be my Wi-Fi connection.
Okay.
I just got a message from my computer. Do you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. I was saying that we have not excavated, but we have identified through surface remains cemeteries of the Ottoman period in the deserted villages of Boeotia, the post-medieval ones. And they're usually located, we usually have two churches in the settlements, one on each on either side of the site of the settlement, whether that is a 15th century village or a 17th century chiftlik. The interesting thing is that the burial remains that we still see on the surface, such as human bones and grave slabs, they appear on either of the two churches. So one of the churches is probably the church of the parish church of the village, and the other is probably the burial church or the cemetery church. As I said, there is no excavation that has been carried out. So, but we know from the sources, we are very lucky to have, since very early in the team, in the Boeotia project, well, the directors had the Ottomanist Mahil Kil, who has done all this work with the Ottoman Tahrir debtors, the Ottoman tax registers, and we are able to identify and know all these nice and detailed figures of population and origin. And ethnicity and religious dogma that they follow. So we know which of the villages are actually Arvanitic, Albanian, or Greek. But that's as far as it goes with cemeteries.
Before we move on to Vionis, who has a question, Thomas has a follow-up question. Are you treating cemeteries as sacred sites?
Well, yes, absolutely. We treat, in our project in Cyprus, and this is why we called it Settled and Sacred Landscapes, is that religious ritual sites of all periods, from early prehistory to today, we consider them as sacred sites, yes, from ancient necropolises to Ottoman cemeteries.
Thank you. Dionysi, you have raised your hand, so please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Thanasi. It was a wonderfully rich and lecture full of texture. And as a historian, I'm very, very jealous about all the great things that you can do. My question has to do with the transitional period. We no longer call them dark ages, but that period. Do you believe? I mean, there's a big debate, and I want your opinion on this. There's people who think that there was a rough transition, and people who, I think from what I heard you say, you're more in the second category of a smooth transition. Do you consider this period a transformation, a kind of old wine in new skin, so not so much gets lost, but it gets just reformulated in a different way? Or do you think that there were breaks, and after these breaks, the reformulation, the transformation took place?
Yes, thank you. That's an interesting question. There is a lot one can discuss on the basis of everything you said. I'm not sure if I belong to either of the categories. As I probably said in my lecture, I can't remember if I mentioned this, but I see these changes, and most people working on the early Byzantine late antique period see this. People like Nikos Sivikis, who have done detailed systematic work in the Peloponnese and other places. see the transformation of cities into industrial places, places where a large human force is still residing. Of course, there is investment in large basilicas and other amenities, but the industries like pottery workshops, kilns, and perhaps other kinds of processing infrastructures are moving into the city within the walls. So this is a process that started already at least since the late 6th century. So to answer your question, I do think that there is a smooth transition to what we see later on, developing fully into the 7th and 8th centuries. Obviously, the way we look at things and the way we interpret the archaeological I'm an archaeologist in principle. The archaeological data gives us the right answer. So if I want to see continuity and in political systems, in social structures, I will see it. I will read it in my material evidence. Now, combining both archaeology and history, and considering that things change sharply towards the late 7th and 8th centuries. I can still see continuities. I mean, the map I showed of Boeotia, which is very characteristic, with all these bishoprics of cities mentioned by Hierocles, by Synecdemos, of Hierocles, and also the bishoprics mentioned in the various notitiae, continue as bishoprics into the 8th century. Only 2 of them, I think, in Boeotia, if I remember correctly, do not show up in the lists of churches. So this is an implication that things did continue, and that the glorious cities of late antiquity over the early Byzantine period didn't continue into a different form, into a transformed form during the 8th century. The role, it is not the materiality as much, it is the role, the services, the functions of these places that is important. So if you look at the material remains, of course, you will obviously see impoverishment and major transformations and decline. But if you look at the role of these places, no matter how expensive or luxurious structurally these places were, I'm sure you will see continuities. So this is my opinion.
Thank you. Any other questions for Athanasios? Froso, do you have a question? I see you turn on your camera. No? Okay.
I don't have. I just want to congratulate. It was amazing. We will talk a lot about all this. Thank you, Athanasios.
Thank you, Froso.
Any other questions? This is your chance. If we have a few more minutes. No? Well, then I will let you say hello or goodbye, good evening, congratulations. If you'd like to turn on your cameras and your microphones, this is your chance to talk to. Hold on, there's one more. Sorry. There is a question. In Cyprus, what is the extent of Ottoman archaeology? In Anatolia, it is yet a developing field.
Yes, it is a developing field also because of the current recent developments on a political level. It didn't used to be the case 10 years ago, not even in Turkey. So in Cyprus, I'm very glad to admit that there are people who are doing very systematic work, archaeologists, very systematic work on the period, carrying out excavations and excavating meticulously and studying systematically the material remains of the period. So this is a developing field, and I'm happy that I can be part of it now. Lina, before we say goodbye to our audience today, let us remind everyone of our forthcoming lecture next week, next Monday, by Maria Parani.
Join us for the next one on Byzantine archaeology. I don't have the title of the lecture now in front of me. Let me find it, but 7:30 in our usual place. Do join us for Maria Parani's lecture, and I will let you know the title if you give me a moment.
Yes, I don't have it in front of me at the moment.
Okay, I have it.
But do join us next week. Lina will tell us the title.
The challenge of depicting cross-dressing female saints in Byzantine art, the case of Saint Ephrosini of Alexandria. So this is next week's lecture. So please, thank you very much. If you'd like to say hello and congratulations to Athanasios, you can turn on your.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye to everybody.
Ευχαριστούμε.
Bye everyone.
Thank you, Thanasi.
Bye. Thank you.
Have a good evening, everybody, and see you next Monday, we hope.
Okay.
And those of you, for the Greeks, the 25th of March is the celebration of 200 years since the independence from the Ottoman rule. So a big day and big celebrations under the COVID pandemic. So it will be a different. So.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Έχει κι άλλα στο chat. Θανάση, θα τα δεις, έχει πάρα πολλά συγχαρητήρια. Θα στα κατεβάσει, ελπίζω, ο Κωνσταντίνος.
Ναι, θα τα προωθήσω αύριο στο Θανάση.
Να το πεις, Θανάση.
Ναι, το κλείνω εγώ. Καλό βράδυ.
Γεια σας, συγχαρητήρια, Θανάση, πολύ ωραία. Μπράβο.